You've probably seen the name Martin Luther, but did you know there's a story behind why it's spelled the way it is? In this episode, I'd like to talk about that. Stay tuned. Hello, friends. Pastor Tim Westermeyer here, Senior Pastor of St. Philip the Deacon in the western suburbs of Minneapolis. Good to be with you as always. Today we are taping this on October 31st, which happens to be the 505th anniversary of the symbolic start of the Reformation. It was begun when Martin Luther nailed the 95 Theses to the castle church door at Wittenberg on October 31st, 1517. So I do have the Reformation still on my mind, and I preached about it this past Sunday. And there was one detail from that sermon which a number of people commented on, and I want to share that in this episode just because it sort of brought up so many questions and so forth. Before I do that, though, I just want to pause also to say a word of thanks. It turns out this past week was the 20th anniversary of my ordination. So I've been doing this pastor thing for 20 years. And I have to say, I've talked about this before, I think. I'm a second career pastor, so I spent about a decade in another career. And I feel so incredibly blessed to do the work that I do. And I want to say thank you to all the people I've had the incredible privilege of working alongside of. I want to say thank you to the amazing members, particularly of St. Philip the Deacon, where I'm currently privileged to serve, who I've had the privilege of serving. It's an amazing congregation, and it is a blessing to be here. And I also want to say thank you to those of you who I've formed relationships through this platform. I'll tell you, 20 years ago, when I was ordained, I never dreamt that I would be taping weekly episodes of a podcast like this and getting to know people from, among other places, Japan and Australia and South Africa and around the country and Canada. And the community that's forming here is a beautiful thing. And I want to say thank you to all of you who are in conversation with me via email and through this channel. If you're new to this channel, a special welcome to you. And if you are new to it, can I just gently encourage you to subscribe to it so that we can continue to build this beautiful community. So again, just a word of thanks as I reflect on 20 years of ministry. Now, back to that sermon that I mentioned. Again, it was focused on Martin Luther. We'll connect to the whole sermon if you want to listen to it. But there was one detail I lifted up at the end of the sermon. I've talked about it before in sermons. I don't believe I've talked about it in this space, but it has to do with Martin Luther's last name, which may seem sort of unremarkable. But as I mentioned in the sermon, one of the achievements that Luther achieved during his work was translating the Bible from the ancient languages of Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek into the German language. And in doing so, he actually sort of single-handedly created or standardized what is today known as modern written German. One of the quirks of the fact that it had not yet been standardized is that during his lifetime, people's last names were spelled in a variety of ways. And so Luther's parents did not spell the family name Luther. They spelled it in other ways that we wouldn't recognize necessarily as Luther. So why then do we know Martin Luther's last name as being spelled that way? And it's directly connected to his knowledge of those ancient languages and his deep conviction that God, through Christ, had freed him from all kinds of things, including the bondage of sin. And so he took a Greek word, eleutheria, and very often, actually, he would, in his academic work, he ended up signing his name simply with that word, eleutherius, which means the one who is freed. But more popularly, in his more popular work, he took the way that Greek word is spelled with a TH, and he used it to change the spelling of his family name, or to standardize the spelling of his family name to Luther, which was a way that Luther was saying every time he signed his name, I am Martin, the freed one, Martin, the one who has been freed, or as one author, and we'll connect to this article, says, He was, in using that spelling, identifying as one freed by Christ and the gospel, freed from the fear of judgment, freed in order to help others find similar freedom. If I might just lift up a couple of resources about Luther, if you're interested in reading more about him, I'll lift up two. One is a book by Martin Marty, who's a church historian from the United States here, called simply Martin Luther. This is actually where I first read about that story about Luther's last name. The other one is a sort of more focused book about how the publishing industry, which was just beginning during Luther's life, sort of forced him to the fore publicly. And so this is called Brand Luther, really long subtitle, How an Unheralded Monk Turned His Small Town into a Center of Publishing, Made Himself the Most Famous Man in Europe, and Started the Protestant Reformation. And just one little aside, and then I'll conclude here. From that book, I first read this quote, which I turned into a little poster. I don't think I've shown this before. We'll try to get a picture of this. But I love this quote because it's Martin Luther, who is the writer and editor working with publishers and printers, showing how particular he was about publishing and printing, something I have a passion about. And the big pull quote on this says this. This is, again, direct from Martin Luther. I cannot say how unhappy and disgusted I am with the printing, to say nothing of the bad typefaces and paper. I absolutely love that quote because it's so non-theological and so sort of particular about printing. Anyway, this week, again, we continue to celebrate the legacy of Martin Luther, who was indeed freed by God. And I pray that all of us who follow his legacy and all Christians everywhere continue to feel that same freedom and share it with others. Thanks as always for being with me. Be well, stay in touch, and God bless.